What's up guys, welcome back to Redstone Engineering. This video is going to go over some tips and tricks that I use to make all of my redstone circuits. Since it's one thing to know what all of the logic gates, comparators, transistors, etc. do, it's another thing to know when to use them and how to use them effectively. So with that, let's jump right in. Alright, so all circuits consist of some number of inputs and some number of outputs. Most of the issues arise by trying to route the inputs to the outputs. And I'm going to use this example here because this is a very classic example of something that I literally had no idea how to do before I learned how to use logic gates effectively. And what this is a two-lever system that opens and closes the door whenever I flip any lever. So right now they're both off. If I flip this lever, it opens. If I flip this lever back off, it closes. I can turn this on, and then I can turn this on, and it'll close. And I can turn this one off, it'll open. I can turn this one off, it'll close, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't matter what the state of the other lever's in, and it will flip the door to the opposite state. This is really useful for when you have like a door into a base and you want to have one lever on one side and one lever on the other side, but it can be non-trivial to do if you don't know how to use logic gates. Alright, so the first thing that I do whenever I go about making a redstone circuit is I look at what my inputs are and I look at my corresponding outputs. So in the case of this circuit, we have two levers as our inputs, and the output of the door goes as follows. So basically we want the door to be closed when both levers are off. So this is the kind of the ground state, if you will. And say we're outside of our base, this lever say is outside of the base, this one is inside the base. If the door is closed, we want this lever turning on to open the door. And likewise, if we're inside and it's closed, we want this to open the door as well. So basically when one lever is down, we want the door to be open. If, say, we do this, we open the door, and now we're inside our base, we want this to close the door. So in summary, we want this state to have the door closed, this to have the door open, this to have the door open, and this to have the door closed. So there's a number of ways to go about trying to hook up all of the redstone in order to carry on this correspondence between the inputs and the outputs. The approach that I usually take is I just start throwing down random stuff back here and adjusting it until I get what I want. The other approach is to write down these inputs and outputs and look at what the logic gates do and see if you can come up with something that way. That's the approach that I use as a last resort if my approach of trial and error doesn't work. The reason I like this example is because in terms of logic gates, the answer to how to wire it up in the back is actually really simple, but it's deceptively difficult if you're not familiar with logic gates. So if we remember our output of the XOR gate, it does precisely what we want, because an XOR gate is on when the inputs are different. So an XOR gate would be off, it would be on, it would be off, and it would be on, which is precisely what we want with the door. And if we go wire it up real fast, we can see that it does exactly what we want. And if you need a refresher on how to build an XOR gate, here you go. So these are our inputs. You put torches here, you put torches here, you wire up the top, you wire up these corners, you wire up these parts, and then you add them together. And if you need a slower rundown of how that works and all of the other logic gates, you can check out the logic gate video. We have this door, and we see that this does exactly what we want, right? So they're both off, it's closed, it's open, it's closed, and it's open. This circuit happens to just use one logic gate, which means that we were able to just figure out what it was pretty quickly. In general, this isn't true though, and this is sometimes when the approach of writing down your inputs and outputs comes in handy, because I just happened to know the inputs and outputs of the XOR gate and knew that it was the same as what we wanted here, but sometimes it's not that obvious, especially if you have multiple logic gates in your circuit. So let's take, for example, a third input that we might have had. And let's say that we want this lever to kind of dictate whether or not the door will open at all. So let's say when it's off, the door is just forced to be off independent of what these levers are doing. And when this lever's on, then these levers operate just like they are right now. This would require another logic gate, right? And it'd actually require an AND gate, because an AND gate would do what we want. Because if one input to an AND gate is off, so this lever would be off, then the output of the AND gate would be off, just like the door, right? So we could hook up the output of the AND gate to the door, and this lever to one of the inputs of the AND gate. So if we do that, and if you remember how to make an AND gate, you inverse both of the inputs, and the other input would be the output of this XOR gate right here. So you inverse both of those, you mix the signal together, and then you inverse the output of whatever that is. And we can see now that basically the door is forced to be off regardless of what we do here. And then if we turn this on, then it operates like it did before, right? Trying to make all three of these inputs work together initially would be really difficult. So what we ended up kind of nominally doing is splitting up our circuit. This is a little bit less easy to do because you need to identify which inputs need to occur first. And this is usually when my approach of trial and error shines, because usually I just throw it down and it helps me identify which inputs need to correspond with each other. So in this case, these inputs are tied hand in hand, right? Because they need to know the state of the other one in order to give us an output, which ironically makes them seem like they're acting independent. And then this lever is just kind of tacked on to the outside of it, right? Because this XOR gate happens on these inputs, and then the AND gate uses the output of the XOR gate completely. So identifying which inputs are more closely tied together and which ones need to like happen first and which ones happen later is a little bit hard, but splitting it up like this helps a lot. And this is why making complex circuits is hard, because you need to identify that and you need to also be able to wire it up. But this is just usually what I do. Now, tip number 3 might not work for everybody, but it certainly is really useful, especially when you're just trying to learn how to do redstone in general. And that is going into creative with an idea of a circuit that you want to build that you don't know how to build and trying to figure it out by yourself. It can be seen as kind of homeworky, but if you enjoy doing problem solving, then it should be fine. And the reason for this is because you need to kind of just do a bunch of problems. This is why, for example, engineering college just gives you a whole bunch of homework problems, because in order to learn problem solving, you really just need to do a bunch of the things over and over again. So in this case, it would just be building a bunch of circuits by yourself and figuring out how you like to approach building the circuits. Because tip number 1 and 2 are usually what I do, but those tips might not work for everybody. You might find something that you like to do, and that would be different than what I like to do. Going into creative also just helps you get acquainted with how some of the logic gates and some of the inputs work and give you an intuition on how to build those circuits. Because I have an intuition on, for example, how to do this third one because I have used AND gates so extensively. But when I was starting out, I had no idea how to wire this up. And going into creative and just figuring stuff out by myself definitely helped me. So that's also something that I would recommend. Alright, that'll be it for this one, guys. I know this video might be a little hit or miss, because it's kind of an instance where the tips and tricks work better the better you are at redstone, which is kind of defeats the purpose of using them. But I would recommend just trying to incorporate them when you're trying to make circuits, because over time they will get easier and easier to use, especially when you get more acquainted with the things that you use, like logic gates, transistors, comparators, in order to wire up the circuits. Let me know down in the comments if you also want to see more examples of like my process of going through and creating some of those circuits, because that might work a little bit better for some people. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.